The first bolt of lightning tore across the Texas sky like God's own fury, illuminating Elijah Porter's face as he raced his horse across the open plain. The second strike hit its mark the lone figure he'd been watching from a distance, a woman whose horse had thrown her minutes before the storm broke. Her body jerked violently before crumpling to the ground, motionless against the tall prairie grass that whipped wildly in the rising wind. "No!" Elijah shouted, digging his heels into his horse's flanks, urging the animal forward through the sheeting rain. The storm had come from nowhere, a common enough occurrence on the West Texas plains in the spring of 1875, but uncommon enough to catch travelers unaware. When Elijah reached the woman's side, he leapt from his saddle, boots hitting the mud with a splash. Her skin was blue-tinged, her soaked clothing plastered against her still form. No breath escaped her parted lips. Acting on instinct and half-remembered instructions from an old army medic, Elijah tilted her head back, pinched her nose, and sealed his mouth over hers. He breathed his own air into her lungs twice, pressing down on her chest between each breath. "Come on," he muttered, rain dripping from the brim of his hat onto her pale face. "Breathe, damn it!" After what felt like an eternity, the woman gasped, her body convulsing as she dragged in a ragged breath. Her eyes fluttered open striking blue, like the clear sky that had existed before the storm, and fixed on him with confusion. "What?" she managed before coughing violently. "Lightning," Elijah explained, relief washing through him as he quickly shrugged out of his duster and wrapped it around her trembling shoulders. "Hit you dead on. Don't try to move yet. My horse," she whispered, trying to sit up despite his warning. "Gone, but mine will carry us both. We need to get you to shelter." He glanced at the horizon where Sweetwater lay, still a good hour's ride away. "Can you hold on if I get you in the saddle?" The woman nodded weakly, and Elijah carefully lifted her. She was lighter than he expected, though her sudden grimace told him she was in considerable pain. He settled her on his horse before mounting behind her, one arm securing her against his chest. "I'm Elijah Porter," he said as they set off at a cautious pace. "Faith," she replied, her voice barely audible over the rain. "Faith Palmer." Elijah nodded, adjusting his hold to keep her from slipping. "Well, Miss Palmer, I reckon it's not your time yet. Someone up there must be watching over you." She didn't respond, and when he glanced down, he saw that she'd passed out, her head resting against his shoulder. Elijah urged his horse faster, the rain beginning to ease as they headed toward Sweetwater, carrying a woman who, by all rights, should have been dead. The doctor's house sat at the edge of Sweetwater, a modest clapboard structure with a weathered sign that read Dr. Samuel Thornton, Physician. Elijah dismounted carefully, cradling Faith in his arms as he approached the door and kicked it with the toe of his boot. After a moment, the door swung open, revealing a gray-haired man with spectacles perched on his nose. "Porter, what's this?" Dr. Thornton asked, eyes widening as he took in the unconscious woman. "Lightning strike, Doc. She was breathing, but she's been out cold for the last 20 minutes. The doctor stepped aside. "Bring her in. Quick now." Elijah carried Faith to the examination table in the back room, laying her down gently. Dr. Thornton immediately began checking her vital signs, his fingers pressing against her wrist. "Pulse is weak but steady," he muttered. What happened exactly? Elijah recounted the incident, including how he'd breathed life back into her. The doctor nodded approvingly. "Good thinking. Not many would know to do that." He began unbuttoning Faith's sodden jacket. "I'll need to examine her properly. You can wait in the front room." Elijah hesitated, reluctant to leave. "Will she be all right?" "Can't say for certain yet. Lightning's a funny thing. Some walk away with just to scare others." The doctor didn't finish his thought. "I'll do what I can. Now give the lady some privacy." Reluctantly, Elijah retreated to the waiting area, removing his wet hat and running a hand through his damp hair. He paced the small room, his mind replaying the moment the lightning had struck, the way her body had convulsed, the stillness that followed. He'd seen men die in the war, had even killed a few himself, but something about Faith Palmer's brush with death affected him differently. An hour passed before Dr. Thornton emerged, wiping his hands on a cloth. Elijah straightened immediately. "She's stable," the doctor announced. "The lightning appears to have entered through her right shoulder and exited through her left foot. There are burns at both sites that I've treated. She's suffering from shock and exhaustion, but her heart seems strong enough." Relief flooded through Elijah. "So she'll recover." "Likely, though not everyone who survives a lightning strike comes back the same. We'll have to wait and see." Dr. Thornton studied Elijah curiously. "Do you know the lady?" "No. Just saw her get thrown from her horse before the storm hit. Was riding out to help when the lightning struck." The doctor's gaze was searching. "Well, she's asking for you. Says she wants to thank the man who saved her life." Elijah nodded, moving toward the examination room. He paused at the doorway, suddenly unsure. Faith Palmer was sitting up now, wrapped in a blanket, her damp blonde hair cascading over her shoulders. Her face was still pale, but color had returned to her lips. When she saw him, a small smile touched her mouth. "Mr. Porter," she said softly, "I believe I owe you my life." Elijah shook his head, stepping into the room. "Anyone would have done the same. We both know that's not true." She winced as she shifted position. "The doctor tells me you breathed life back into me. Learned it in the war," Elijah explained, feeling unexpectedly self-conscious. "Where were you headed before the storm caught you?" Faith's eyes clouded slightly. "Sweetwater, I have. Business here," she hesitated. "I should introduce myself properly. Faith Palmer. I've come from Boston to settle my uncle's affairs. He passed last month. Theodore Palmer." Elijah's brow furrowed. "The bookshop owner?" "Yes. Did you know him?" "Not well, but Sweetwater's not a large town. Everyone knows everyone, more or less." He glanced at her burned shoulder, visible where the blanket had slipped. "Dr. Thornton says you should recover, but you'll need rest." "I don't have accommodations yet," Faith admitted. "I was planning to assess my uncle's home, but in my condition." "The Magnolia Inn is clean and respectable," Elijah offered. "Mrs. Winters runs a tight ship. I can arrange a room for you if you'd like." Faith studied him, as if trying to determine his intentions. Whatever she saw in his face must have satisfied her, because she nodded. "That's very kind. I can pay, of course." "No need for that now. Rest here while I make the arrangements. I'll come back with a wagon to transport you more comfortably." As Elijah turned to leave, Faith called after him. "Mr. Porter, what do you do in Sweetwater? Are you a lawman?" Elijah smiled slightly. "No, madam, just a rancher. My place is about 5 miles east of town." "Then I'm doubly fortunate you happened to be riding by." Their eyes met for a moment, and Elijah felt something stir within him, a feeling he'd thought long buried after the war. He tipped his hat. "Rest easy, Miss Palmer. I'll return shortly." The afternoon sun had broken through the clouds as Elijah walked to the Magnolia Inn, his boots leaving muddy prints on the boardwalk. Sweetwater was bustling with activity after the storm, townsfolk emerging to assess any damage and continue their business. Mrs. Winters, a plump woman with silver-streaked hair, greeted Elijah warmly when he entered the inn. "Mr. Porter, what brings you to town today? Thought you'd be seeing to your cattle after that storm." "Got caught in it myself," Elijah explained. "I'm here to secure a room for a lady, Miss Faith Palmer. She's Theodore Palmer's niece, come to settle his affairs." Mrs. Winters' eyebrows rose. "Old Theo's niece? Well, I never knew he had family back east. Is she staying long?" "I couldn't say." She's at the doctor's now, had an accident on the road. Nothing serious, I hope, lightning strike. At Mrs. Winter's gasp, Elijah added, Doc thinks she'll recover, but she needs rest. Lightning, Lord have mercy. Mrs. Winters bustled behind the counter. I've got a nice room on the first floor, save her climbing stairs. When will she arrive? I'm fetching her shortly. I'll need to borrow a wagon, too. My horse is tired and she's in no condition to ride. Take mine, Mrs. Winters offered. It's out back. And tell the poor dear that meals are included, breakfast and supper. Elijah thanked her and arranged payment for a week's stay. As he left to collect the wagon, he found himself thinking about Faith Palmer's blue eyes and the way they'd looked at him with such gratitude. It had been a long time since a woman had looked at him that way, or any way at all. Since returning from the war, he'd kept mostly to himself, focusing on building his small ranch and avoiding the complications that came with town life. But there was something about Faith Palmer that intrigued him. Perhaps it was the shared experience of her near death, or maybe it was simply that she was new and different in a town where everyone knew everyone else's business. Whatever the reason, Elijah found himself looking forward to seeing her again. By the time Elijah returned to the doctor's office with Mrs. Winter's wagon, Faith was dressed in a simple lone dress, her damaged clothes having been deemed unwearable. Dr. Thornton had fashioned a sling for her injured arm and provided her with laudanum for the pain, though she assured Elijah she preferred to keep her wits about her. The burns are painful, she admitted as he helped her into the wagon, but I'd rather endure them than feel muddled. Stubborn, Elijah remarked, arranging blankets around her. That might serve you well out here. I'm told it's a family trait, Faith replied with a small smile. My uncle was apparently quite set in his ways. Elijah chuckled as he climbed up beside her. That's one way to put it. Theo Palmer was the only man I know who'd argue with the mayor over the placement of a hitching post for 3 weeks straight. The mention of her uncle brought both amusement and sadness to Faith's eyes. I wish I had known him better. We corresponded regularly, but I haven't seen him since I was a child. What brought him out west? Elijah asked as he guided the wagon carefully through Sweetwater's Main Street. The same thing that brings most people, I suppose, a fresh start. He was a teacher in Boston until a scandal, unfounded accusations he always maintained, forced him to resign. He came here in '58, before the war. Elijah nodded. He was well respected here. His bookshop was the only place to get reading material for 50 miles. You read, Mr. Porter? Faith asked, studying his profile. The question surprised him. When I can. Time's not always easy to come by on a ranch, especially one I run mostly alone. No wife to help share the burden. The question was asked casually, but Elijah detected genuine curiosity. No, madam. Never found the time for courting, I suppose. Faith nodded, turning her gaze to the town they were passing through. Sweetwater wasn't large, just one main street with shops lining both sides, a few cross streets with residences, a church, a school, and the requisite saloons and brothels tucked discreetly at the far end of town. It's smaller than I imagined, Faith commented, but growing. The railroad's coming through next year. That'll change things. For better or worse, Elijah considered. Both likely. More commerce, more opportunities. More trouble too, I expect. They arrived at the Magnolia Inn where Mrs. Winters was waiting on the porch. She bustled forward to help Faith down, clucking sympathetically when she saw the sling. You poor dear. Struck by lightning, I never heard such a thing. But you're in good hands now. I've prepared a room with a view of the garden, such as it is after the storm. Faith thanked her graciously, then turned to Elijah. Mr. Porter, I can't thank you enough for your help today. I quite literally owe you my life. Elijah shifted uncomfortably under her earnest gaze. "No debt between us, Miss Palmer. I'm just glad you're on the mend." "Nevertheless," she insisted, "I hope you'll call on me when I'm more recovered. I'd like to express my gratitude properly." "I'll check in on you," he promised, tipping his hat. "Rest now." As Mrs. Winters led Faith inside, Elijah stood watching for a moment longer than necessary. Then, with a shake of his head, he climbed back into the wagon to return it before collecting his horse from the doctor's stable. The next morning dawned clear and warm, the previous day's storm a distant memory, except for the puddles still dotting the streets of Sweetwater. Elijah had risen before dawn, as was his habit, to tend to his cattle and repair a section of fence damaged in the storm. By mid-morning, he found himself thinking about Faith Palmer, wondering how she had fared through the night. Before he could talk himself out of it, Elijah saddled his horse and rode toward town. He told himself it was simply the decent thing to do, checking on someone who'd suffered such a trauma, but he couldn't deny the flutter of anticipation he felt as he approached the Magnolia Inn. Mrs. Winters greeted him with knowing eyes. "She's in the parlor, Mr. Porter. Been up since 7 despite my insistence that she rest. Stubborn as they come, that one." Elijah found Faith seated by the window, a book open in her lap. She looked up as he entered, her face brightening. "Mr. Porter, I hoped you might call. Thought I should check on how you're faring," he said, removing his hat. "How are the burns?" "Painful, but Dr. Thornton's salve helps." She gestured to the chair opposite her. "Please sit. Mrs. Winters just brought fresh coffee." Elijah took the offered seat. Noticing that Faith looked better today, her cheeks held more color, and though her right arm remained in its sling, she moved with more ease. She wore a simple blue dress that complemented her eyes, her blonde hair neatly arranged in a practical style. "I've been thinking about what happens next," Faith said after pouring him coffee. "I need to assess my uncle's property, both the bookshop and his home. Would you happen to know where I might find the keys?" "Mayor Harrison likely has them. He's been overseeing Theo's affairs since he passed." Faith nodded. "I should call on him then, though I confess I'm nervous about what I'll find. I've come to sell everything, you see. I have a life waiting in Boston, a teaching position at a ladies' seminary." "Teaching runs in the family then," Elijah observed. "Yes. Though unlike my uncle, I've managed to avoid scandal." She smiled wryly. "At least until now. Being struck by lightning and revived by a handsome rancher might raise a few eyebrows in Boston society." Elijah nearly choked on his coffee at her candid remark. Faith's eyes widened as she realized what she'd said, a blush spreading across her cheeks. "Forgive me, that was forward. Dr. Thornton warned me that lightning survivors sometimes lose their sense of propriety. I didn't mean to embarrass you." "No embarrassment," Elijah assured her, though his own face felt warm. "Just unexpected." Faith looked relieved. "In any case, I'd be grateful if you could direct me to the mayor's office. I should begin settling my uncle's affairs as soon as possible." "I can do better than that," Elijah offered. "I can take you there myself, and then to your uncle's properties if you feel up to it." "That's very kind, but I've imposed on you enough already." "It's no imposition. My ranch hands can manage without me for one day." Faith studied him for a moment before nodding. "Then I accept, gratefully. Let me fetch my shawl." As she left the room, Elijah finished his coffee, wondering what had possessed him to offer his entire day. He had plenty of work waiting at the ranch, and he wasn't in the habit of playing tour guide to visitors. But there was something about Faith Palmer that made him want to extend his time with her, a quality he couldn't quite define, but found himself drawn to nonetheless. Mayor Harrison's office was located above the town's small bank, accessible by an external staircase that proved challenging for Faith with her injured arm. Elijah offered his arm for support, noting how naturally her hand rested in the crook of his elbow. The mayor, a portly man with an impressive mustache, received them warmly, especially after learning Faith's identity. "Miss Palmer, I've been corresponding with your lawyer in Boston, but I had no idea you were coming personally. My condolences on your uncle's passing. He was a fine man." "Thank you, Mayor Harrison. I decided matters would be settled more efficiently in person." "Quite right, quite right." The mayor shuffled through papers on his desk. "Here we are: inventory of Theodore's assets, the bookshop, his home on Willow Street, and various personal effects. All in good order, though the bookshop has been closed since his passing." "I understand I'll need keys to access the properties?" Faith inquired. "Yes, indeed." Mayor Harrison opened a drawer and produced 2 keys. "The larger one is for the shop, the smaller for the residence. I must warn you, though Theo lived simply, very simply." Faith pocketed the keys. "I'm prepared for that. My uncle never put much stock in material comforts." "A man after my own heart," Elijah remarked, earning a smile from Faith. After concluding their business with the mayor, Elijah escorted Faith to the bookshop first. It stood on a corner of Main Street, a modest storefront with large windows now covered with brown paper from the inside. Faith hesitated at the door, key in hand. "Are you all right?" Elijah asked quietly. "Yes, it's just, opening this door makes his death real somehow. In Boston, I could pretend he was still here, just far away." Elijah nodded, understanding. "Would you like me to open it?" "No, I should do this." Faith inserted the key and turned it. The lock clicked, and she pushed the door open. The interior was dim, sunlight filtering weakly through the papered windows. Shelves lined every wall, filled with books of all sizes. A counter with a ledger book sat near the back, and a small pot-bellied stove occupied one corner. The air smelled of dust, leather, and paper. Faith moved slowly through the space, her fingertips trailing along book spines. "He loved knowledge," she said softly. "Even when I was a child, he always had a book in his hand. He'd read to me for hours, adventures, histories, poetry." Elijah watched her from the doorway, giving her space to absorb her surroundings. "Sweetwater won't be the same without this place. The children especially loved your uncle. He'd let them read here even if they couldn't afford to buy anything." Faith turned to him, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "What will happen when I sell? Will someone continue the bookshop? Hard to say. Property on Main Street is valuable, especially with the railroad coming. Might become another saloon or general store." Faith's expression fell. "That would be a shame. This town needs books more than it needs another saloon." "Can't argue with that," Elijah agreed, "but businesses need to turn a profit." "Did this one turn a profit, I mean?" Elijah shrugged. "Your uncle never seemed to want for anything, but he lived frugally." "I don't think he was in it for the money." Faith nodded thoughtfully, continuing her circuit of the shop. She paused at a small table in the corner where several objects were arranged: a pipe, a pair of reading glasses, and a framed photograph. She picked up the photograph, studying it. "This is my mother," she said. "And me as a child. I didn't know he kept this." Elijah moved closer to look. The photograph showed a beautiful woman with Faith's eyes, seated with a young girl of perhaps 7 or 8 standing beside her. Both were dressed in the formal style of the period, their expressions serious as the photograph required. "You favor her," Elijah observed, "so I've been told." Faith set the photograph down carefully. "Shall we continue to his home? I think I've seen enough here for today." Theodore Palmer's residence proved to be a small cottage on Willow Street, set back from the road with a modest garden that had grown wild in his absence. The interior was neat but Spartan: a single bedroom, a kitchen with a small table, and a sitting room dominated by more bookshelves. Well, the mayor wasn't exaggerating, Faith remarked as they walked through. He did live simply. Most folks out here do, Elijah said. Luxuries are hard to come by. Faith moved to the kitchen window, which overlooked what might once have been a vegetable garden. It's peaceful here. I can see why he stayed, even after the scandal faded from memory. Sweetwater has a way of growing on people, Elijah agreed, leaning against the doorframe. Not much excitement, but good people mostly. Faith turned to face him, her expression thoughtful. Thank you for accompanying me today, Mr. Porter. You've been extraordinarily kind to a stranger. Elijah, he said, if we're going to keep spending time together, you might as well use my given name. Elijah, she repeated, a smile touching her lips, and you must call me Faith. The moment stretched between them, filled with something unspoken. Elijah found himself noticing details he hadn't before: the small freckle just below her right eye, the way the afternoon light turned her hair to gold, the gentle curve of her mouth as she smiled. Faith broke the silence first. I should rest. Dr. Thornton was quite insistent about not overexerting myself. Of course, Elijah straightened. I'll walk you back to the inn. As they stepped outside, Faith locked the door behind them. Will you call again tomorrow? I could use your insight as I make my plans. I'd be happy to, Elijah replied, offering his arm once more. Though I'm not sure how much insight I can offer on selling property. Perhaps not, Faith admitted, but I value your company nonetheless. The walk back to the Magnolia Inn was conducted in comfortable silence, each lost in their own thoughts. When they reached the inn, Faith hesitated on the porch. Elijah, she said softly, I want to thank you again for saving my life. I keep thinking about how differently yesterday could have ended. Best not to dwell on that, he advised. You're here breathing. That's what matters. Faith nodded, but her eyes remained troubled. When the lightning struck, there was a moment, I don't know if it was real or a dream, but I saw something. A bright light, a sense of peace, and then your breath filling my lungs, calling me back. Elijah didn't know how to respond to such a revelation. His experiences with death during the war had been anything but peaceful, bloody, violent ends that still haunted his dreams. I'm glad I was there, he said simply. Faith smiled, reaching out to squeeze his hand briefly. As am I. Good night, Elijah. Until tomorrow. Elijah watched her enter the inn before turning toward the livery stable where he'd left his horse. His hand still tingled where she'd touched it, and his mind replayed their conversations throughout the day. It had been a long time since he'd spent so many hours in someone's company, longer still since he'd enjoyed it so much. As he rode back to his ranch with the setting sun at his back, Elijah acknowledged to himself that Faith Palmer had awakened something in him, something he'd thought as dead as the Confederate soldiers he'd buried. It was too soon to name it, too fragile to examine closely, but it was there nonetheless, a warmth in his chest that hadn't been there before. The following days established a pattern. Elijah would ride into town by mid-morning, and Faith would be waiting at the Magnolia Inn, her injuries gradually healing. Together they would visit the bookshop or her uncle's house, sorting through belongings and discussing what should be kept, sold, or donated. Faith proved to be methodical and practical, though occasionally sentimental about items that had clearly meant something to her uncle. Look at these, she said one afternoon, holding up a bundle of letters tied with faded ribbon. They're from my mother to Uncle Theodore, dating back 30 years. Elijah watched as she carefully untied the ribbon and opened one letter. Her eyes moved across the page, a small smile playing on her lips. She's telling him about my first day of school, Faith said. Apparently, I refused to leave without bringing my favorite book, and then insisted on reading it to the other children instead of listening to the teacher. Sounds like you were headstrong even then, Elijah observed, amused. My father called it the Palmer stubbornness. Said it skipped a generation with my mother but came back with a vengeance in me. I can believe that, Elijah said, his tone warm. You're certainly determined. Faith looked up from the letter, her expression turning more serious. I've been thinking about the bookshop, Elijah. What you said about the children who used it. It troubles me to think of it becoming something else. It's your property to do with as you wish, Elijah reminded her. Yes, but... Faith hesitated. What if I didn't sell it? What if I stayed in Sweetwater and continued my uncle's work? The suggestion caught Elijah by surprise. What about your teaching position in Boston? I could teach here, Faith replied, her eyes brightening with the idea. The school could surely use another teacher, and I could run the bookshop in the afternoons. Children need books, especially out here where the world must seem so far away. It's not an easy life, Elijah cautioned, even as hope stirred within him. Nothing like Boston. Faith's gaze met his. I'm discovering that Sweetwater has compensations Boston lacks. The air between them charged with meaning, and Elijah found himself moving closer to her without conscious thought. Faith didn't back away, her eyes holding his steadily. Faith, he began, but was interrupted by a knock at the door. Faith blinked, the moment broken. Who could that be? Elijah moved to open the door, revealing Mrs. Winters, looking apologetic. Sorry to disturb you, dears, but there's a telegram for Miss Palmer. Just arrived at the office, and young Tommy thought it might be urgent. Faith accepted the folded paper, thanking Mrs. Winters, who departed with a knowing look at the two of them alone in the cottage. Faith opened the telegram, her expression changing as she read. Is everything all right? Elijah asked, concerned by her sudden pallor. It's from the seminary in Boston, Faith said, her voice strained. They require my answer immediately. The position must be filled by the end of the month. Elijah nodded, understanding. You have a decision to make. Yes. Faith folded the telegram carefully. One I thought I had more time to consider. What will you do? Faith looked around the small cottage, then back at Elijah. I don't know. Boston represents security, a respectable position, but here. Her voice trailed off. Here is unknown, Elijah finished for her. Wild country with wild weather that nearly killed you. And yet, Faith said softly, here is also where I found you. The admission hung in the air between them, honest and vulnerable. Elijah stepped closer, taking her hands in his. I won't pretend I don't want you to stay, he said. These past days with you have been. I haven't felt this way in a long time, Faith. Maybe never. Faith's fingers tightened around his. I feel it too, but we've known each other less than a week. Is that enough to base such a significant decision on? Maybe not, Elijah admitted, but it's enough to consider the possibility. Faith nodded, her eyes still troubled. I need to think, to be sure I'm not being reckless, of course. Elijah released her hands reluctantly. Take the time you need. As he left the cottage, Elijah tried to temper his hopes. Faith had a life waiting for her in Boston, civilized, secure, familiar. What could Sweetwater offer that would compare? What could he offer? A rancher with little to his name beyond a small herd and the land he worked. It seemed presumptuous to think she might choose this life, choose him over everything she'd known. And yet, he couldn't help but hope. That evening, a gentle knock on the inn's parlor door pulled Faith from her thoughts. She had been sitting by the window for hours, the telegram in her lap, weighing her options. When she called for the visitor to enter, she was surprised to see not Mrs. Winters but Elijah. I hope I'm not intruding, he said, hat in hand. Not at all, Faith assured him, gesturing to the chair opposite hers. I've been lost in my thoughts all evening. Any closer to a decision? Elijah asked, settling into the chair. No, both choices have merit, both involve sacrifice. Faith sighed. I keep thinking about the moment the lightning struck me, how quickly life can change or end. It makes me question what truly matters. And what does matter, that is. Faith considered the question carefully. Connection, purpose, the feeling that one's life has meaning beyond mere existence. And which place offers you that? Elijah pressed gently. Boston offers security and familiarity, a respected position doing work I love. Faith's gaze met his. Sweetwater offers possibility, the chance to make a real difference in a place that needs it, and she hesitated. And Elijah prompted. And you, Faith said simply. Someone I never expected to meet, who literally breathed life back into me. I can't ignore what that might mean. Elijah leaned forward, his expression earnest. Faith, I'm not a man who speaks easily about feelings. The war taught me to keep things close, to expect loss. But you've awakened something in me I thought was long dead. Elijah, let me finish, please. He took a deep breath. I won't ask you to stay for me, that wouldn't be fair. But I will ask you to consider staying for yourself, for the good you could do here, for the life you might build. And if you decide to stay, I want to court you properly, to see if what we feel now might grow into something lasting. Faith felt tears prick at her eyes, moved by his honesty. You hardly know me. I know enough, Elijah countered. I know you're brave and kind. I know you think of others before yourself. I know you love books and learning, and you value both in others. I know you're beautiful, not just in appearance but in spirit. His words touched Faith deeply. No one had ever spoken to her this way, with such genuine appreciation for who she was. I need to send a response to the seminary tomorrow, she said finally. They can't hold the position indefinitely. Elijah nodded, understanding the deadline. Whatever you decide, I'll respect it. Thank you. Faith reached across the small table between them to touch his hand. For everything. Elijah stood, recognizing her need for solitude to make her decision. I'll come by tomorrow afternoon. If you'd rather not see me then, just leave word with Mrs. Winters. After he left, Faith returned to the window, watching as Elijah mounted his horse and rode away. The setting sun cast long shadows across Sweetwater's Main Street, gilding the simple buildings with a golden light that made them beautiful in their own rugged way. So different from Boston's refined architecture, yet there was an honesty to this place that appealed to her. She thought of her uncle, who had found contentment here after scandal forced him from the life he knew. Could she do the same? Not fleeing scandal, but choosing a different path than the one expected of her. Faith closed her eyes, remembering the moment the lightning had struck, the flash of searing pain followed by profound peace, and then Elijah's breath filling her lungs, calling her back to life. Perhaps that moment had been more than a near-death experience. Perhaps it had been a beginning. With sudden clarity, Faith knew what she must do. The next morning she sent 2 telegrams. The first, to the seminary in Boston, respectfully declining the teaching position. The second, to her attorney, instructing him to forward her remaining belongings to Sweetwater, Texas. By the time Elijah arrived that afternoon, Faith was at the bookshop, the windows uncovered to let in sunlight, a broom in her hand as she swept years of dust from the wooden floor. She looked up at the jingle of the bell above the door, a smile spreading across her face at the sight of him. "You're staying," he said, taking in the scene before him, the open ledger on the counter, the books being arranged on a display table. "I am," Faith confirmed, setting the broom aside. "I spoke with Mayor Harrison this morning. The school board has agreed to hire me as a teacher starting next month, and I'll reopen the bookshop afternoons and Saturdays." Elijah crossed the room to her, his joy evident. "You're sure? Boston will always be there," Faith finished for him. "But this what I can do here. Who I can be here, this feels right, Elijah. Like I was meant to come to Sweetwater, meant to be struck by that lightning so you could find me. That's quite a fateful interpretation of a natural disaster, Elijah said, though his eyes were warm with happiness. Perhaps, Faith admitted. But I nearly died on that plane, Elijah. You brought me back with your own breath. How could I walk away from the man who gave me a second chance at life? Elijah cupped her face gently in his calloused hands. May I kiss you, Faith Palmer? I've been wanting to since the moment you opened your eyes in that storm. Faith's answer was to rise on her toes, closing the distance between them. The kiss was gentle at first, tentative, but quickly deepened as they gave in to the feelings that had been building since their first meeting. When they finally parted, both were breathless. That, Faith said with a soft laugh, was worth staying for. Elijah's eyes crinkled at the corners as he smiled. Just the beginning, I hope. The beginning of something wonderful, Faith agreed, her heart lighter than it had been in years. Over the following weeks, Faith settled into life in Sweetwater. The cottage on Willow Street became her home, with Elijah helping to repair the roof and fence the overgrown garden. The bookshop reopened to much excitement, particularly from the town's children, who flocked to Faith's weekly reading sessions. And the school board was delighted with their new teacher, whose Eastern education brought fresh approaches to their small schoolhouse. Throughout it all, Elijah courted her properly, as promised. They took Sunday drives in his wagon, attended church together, and shared meals at the Magnolia Inn under Mrs. Winter's approving eye. In the evenings, they often sat on Faith's porch, talking about their pasts, their hopes for the future, and the books Faith insisted Elijah read so they could discuss them. As summer turned to fall, their feelings deepened into something neither could deny. It was on a crisp October evening, with stars scattered like diamonds across the Texas sky, that Elijah finally spoke the words he'd been holding in his heart. I love you, Faith Palmer, he said as they walked back from a harvest social at the church. I think I've loved you since I breathed life back into you on that storm-swept plain. Faith stopped walking, turning to face him in the moonlight. And I love you, Elijah Porter, more than I thought possible in such a short time. Elijah took her hands in his expression solemn. I'm not a wealthy man. I have my ranch, my cattle, and not much else. But everything I have, everything I am, is yours if you want it. Faith's heart swelled with emotion. Are you asking what I think you're asking? I am. Elijah dropped to one knee in the middle of the quiet street, looking up at her with all the love in his heart. Faith Palmer, would you do me the honor of becoming my wife? Yes, Faith answered without hesitation. 1,000 times yes. Elijah rose, pulling her into his arms and kissing her with a passion that left them both breathless. When they parted, Faith laughed, joy bubbling up from deep within her. What's so funny? Elijah asked, smiling at her happiness. I was just thinking, Faith replied, that getting struck by lightning might be the best thing that ever happened to me. Elijah chuckled, tucking her hand in the crook of his arm as they continued their walk. I wouldn't recommend it as a way to find love, but in our case, I can't argue with the results. They were married in Sweetwater's small church on the first day of November, 1875, with the entire town in attendance. Faith wore a simple white dress ordered from a catalog, with wildflowers in her hair instead of a veil. Elijah, so handsome in his best suit, couldn't take his eyes off her as she walked down the aisle on Mayor Harrison's arm. The celebration afterward was held at the Magnolia Inn, with tables set up in the garden and lanterns hanging from the trees. There was music and dancing, food and drink, and a feeling of community that reinforced Faith's decision to make Sweetwater her home. As evening fell, Elijah led his bride away from the festivities toward a waiting wagon decorated with ribbons and flowers. They would spend their wedding night at his ranch, soon to be their ranch, with plans to divide their time between there and the cottage in town during the school term. "Happy, Mrs. Porter?" Elijah asked as he helped her into the wagon. Faith smiled, her heart full to bursting. "Happier than I ever dreamed possible." Elijah leaned down to kiss her, a promise of the night to come. "Let's go home." As they drove away from town, Faith leaned against her husband's shoulder, watching the stars emerge above them. The future stretched before them, full of promise and possibility. There would be challenges, of course life on the frontier ensured that, but they would face them together. Faith thought back to that fateful day on the plain, when lightning had stopped her heart and Elijah's breath had started it again. If anyone had told her then that she would find love, purpose, and a new life in this wild Texas town, she would never have believed it. Yet here she was, married to the man who had saved her life, building a future neither of them had imagined before their paths crossed in that sudden storm. Some might call it coincidence. Faith preferred to think of it as destiny. Winter in Sweetwater brought cold winds across the plains and occasional dustings of snow that transformed the landscape. Faith found herself busier than ever, balancing her duties at the school with running the bookshop and adjusting to life as Elijah's wife. They had settled into a rhythm, with Faith staying at the cottage in town during the school week and joining Elijah at the ranch on weekends and holidays. December brought preparations for Christmas, with Faith organizing a pageant at the school and special reading events at the bookshop. One evening, as she was closing up the shop, the door opened, bringing a gust of cold air in her husband's tall form. "Elijah," Faith exclaimed, delighted by the surprise. "I wasn't expecting you until Friday." He crossed the room to kiss her, his face ruddy from the cold. "Couldn't wait that long to see my wife. Besides, I have news." "News?" Faith set aside the ledger she'd been updating. "Good, I hope. The best." Elijah's eyes sparkled with excitement. "Remember that parcel of land adjoining mine to the east, the one with the creek running through it? The Wilkins property. You've been talking about it since we married." "Old man Wilkins finally agreed to sell. I signed the papers this morning." Faith gasped. "Elijah, that's wonderful, but can we afford it?" "Just barely," he admitted. "But with the water rights it gives us, we can expand the herd next year, and—" He hesitated, suddenly looking uncertain. "There's something else." "What is it?" Faith asked, curious about his change in demeanor. "The Wilkins place has a house on it, nothing fancy but solid. 2 bedrooms, a good kitchen. It's closer to town than my current place, our place." Understanding dawned on Faith. "You're thinking we could live there, together all the time?" Elijah nodded. "It's a 15-minute ride to town. You could go back and forth each day for school and the bookshop, and I'd be close enough to help if needed." "Oh, Elijah," Faith threw her arms around him. "It sounds perfect." "It needs work," he cautioned. "Been empty a while, but by spring it could be a proper home." "Our home," Faith said softly, resting her head against his chest, "where we can build our future. Maybe even start a family," Elijah suggested, his voice filled with hope. "If you're ready for that." Faith looked up at him, love swelling in her heart. "I've been thinking about that myself." In fact, she took a deep breath. "I've been waiting for the right moment to tell you. I'm quite certain, actually, we're already expecting." Elijah's expression transformed, shock giving way to wonder and then pure joy. "A baby, we're having a baby." Faith nodded, tears of happiness filling her eyes. "Dr. Thornton confirmed it yesterday. I'm about 2 months along. By summer, we'll be a family of 3. Elijah lifted her off her feet, spinning her around the bookshop before gently setting her down again, suddenly concerned. "Should I not have done that? I don't want to hurt you or the baby, Faith laughed, touching his cheek tenderly. I'm pregnant, not made of glass, but your concern is very sweet. Elijah placed a hand reverently on her still flat stomach. A child, our child. His voice was thick with emotion. I never thought I'd have this, Faith. After the war, I didn't think I deserved happiness like this. You deserve all the happiness in the world, Faith assured him, covering his hand with her own. And I intend to spend my life making sure you have it. That night, as they sat before the fire in Faith's cottage, they talked of the future, the new house, the baby, their hopes and dreams. Faith couldn't help but marvel at how much her life had changed in just 6 months. From near death on a storm-swept plain to this moment of perfect contentment, it had been a journey she could never have anticipated, but would never regret. "What are you thinking about?" Elijah asked, noticing her thoughtful expression. "Just how fortunate I am," Faith replied, nestling closer to him on the small sofa. "To have found you, to have chosen this life." "I'm the fortunate one," Elijah countered. "If I hadn't been riding that way that day, if the storm hadn't come when it did." "But you were, and it did," Faith said firmly. "And here we are." "Here we are," Elijah agreed, kissing the top of her head. "Exactly where we're meant to be." By spring, the Wilkins house had been transformed into a comfortable home. Elijah had repaired the roof, replaced broken windows, and built new furniture for their growing family. Faith had planted a garden, hung curtains, and filled the bookshelves with volumes from her uncle's collection. It was a perfect blending of their lives, his practical, hard-working nature, and her appreciation for beauty and learning. April brought warm breezes across the plains and wildflowers that carpeted the land in vibrant colors. Faith's belly had grown round with their child, and though she had reluctantly given up teaching as her pregnancy progressed, she still managed the bookshop with the help of a young assistant. One evening, as they sat on the porch of their new home watching the sunset, a spring storm began building on the horizon. Dark clouds gathered, illuminated occasionally by distant lightning. Faith shivered, not from cold but from memory. "Should we go inside?" Elijah asked, noting her discomfort. "No," Faith said determinedly. "I won't fear storms for the rest of my life. Besides, this one's still far off." Elijah put his arm around her. "You know, I still think about that day, finding you there so still. For a moment I thought I was too late." "But you weren't," Faith reminded him, leaning into his embrace. "You saved me." "You saved me too, in a way," Elijah admitted. "I was just existing before you came to Sweetwater, going through the motions without really living." Faith smiled, taking his hand and placing it on her belly where their child kicked vigorously. "And now I have everything I never knew I wanted," Elijah said, his voice filled with wonder at the movement beneath his palm. "A wife, a child on the way, a home filled with love." "And books," Faith added with a laugh. "Don't forget the books." "How could I? You make me read enough of them," he teased, but his expression was fond. The literary discussions Faith insisted upon had become one of his favorite parts of their marriage, though he'd never admit how much he looked forward to them. The storm drew closer, thunder rumbling across the plain. Faith watched it approach, determined to face her fear. Elijah sensed her tension and held her tighter. "We'll be fine," he assured her. "The house is sound." "I know," Faith said. "It's not that, it's just, I sometimes wonder if I'll ever see a storm without thinking of that day." "Probably not," Elijah answered honestly. "Some experiences change us forever, but maybe that's not entirely bad. That storm brought us together." As if in response, a flash of lightning illuminated the sky, followed seconds later by a crash of thunder. Faith flinched but didn't move to go inside. Instead, she turned in Elijah's arms to face him. "You're right," she said. That storm gave me this life. I wouldn't change it, not for anything. Elijah kissed her, a silent affirmation of his agreement. When they parted, the first raindrops were beginning to fall, pattering on the porch roof above them. "Now we should go in," Elijah said, helping Faith to her feet. "Don't want my wife and child catching cold." They spent the evening in their cozy parlor, reading aloud from Faith's latest acquisition while the storm raged outside. By the time they retired to bed, it had passed, leaving behind the fresh scent of rain-washed earth and a sky full of stars. In June, just as the summer heat began to settle over the plains, Faith gave birth to their son. The labor was long and difficult, with Dr. Thornton eventually being called from town, but with Elijah by her side, Faith found the strength to bring their child into the world. "A boy, Doctor," Thornton announced, placing the squalling infant on Faith's chest. "A fine, healthy boy." Faith wept with joy, her fingers tracing the perfect features of their son's face. "Look what we made, Elijah." Elijah, who had not left her side throughout the ordeal, was overcome with emotion. "He's perfect," he managed, his voice rough with unshed tears. "Just like his mother." They named him Theodore Samuel Porter, honoring both Faith's uncle and the doctor who had cared for her after the lightning strike. Little Theo, as they called him, had Faith's blue eyes and Elijah's strong features, a perfect blend of them both. Parenthood brought new challenges and deeper joys to their marriage. Elijah proved to be a devoted father, often carrying Theo with him around the ranch in a sling Faith had fashioned, proudly showing his son the cattle, the horses, and the land that would someday be his. Faith resumed her work at the bookshop when Theo was 2 months old, bringing him with her to the delight of her customers, who cooed over the baby and praised his alertness and charm. Life settled into a new rhythm, busy but fulfilling. Faith watched her husband and son together and marveled at how complete her happiness was. The young woman who had arrived in Sweetwater a year ago, struck down by lightning on the open plain and brought back to life by a stranger's breath, could never have imagined the life she would build here. When Theo was 6 months old, Elijah and Faith celebrated their first wedding anniversary. Mrs. Winters insisted on watching the baby so they could have an evening to themselves, a rare luxury since becoming parents. Elijah surprised Faith with a picnic by the creek that ran through their property, a spot they both loved for its beauty and tranquility. "Happy anniversary, Mrs. Porter," Elijah said, raising a glass of wine to toast his wife. "It's been the best year of my life." Faith clinked her glass against his. "And mine, though I'm still amazed sometimes that I ended up here, married to you with our beautiful son." "Having second thoughts," Elijah teased, though Faith detected a hint of genuine concern beneath the jest. "Never," she assured him, setting her glass down to take his hand. "I'm exactly where I'm meant to be. Sometimes, though, I wonder what would have happened if I'd taken that position in Boston." "You'd be teaching proper young ladies how to be even more proper," Elijah suggested. "Probably bored out of your mind," Faith laughed. "Perhaps, or perhaps I'd have found satisfaction in it, but I wouldn't have you or Theo or this place." She gestured at the landscape around them, bathed in golden evening light. "I wouldn't trade this life for any other." Elijah's expression grew serious. "I worry sometimes that you sacrifice too much to stay here. Your career, your society, the comforts of the East." "What comforts?" Faith scoffed playfully. "Corsets and calling cards. I much prefer the freedom of the West." Her tone softened. "As for career, I'm still teaching, still running the bookshop, and as for society," she smiled, "I've made true friends here, Elijah. Mrs. Winters, Dr. Thornton, even Mayor Harrison. That's worth more than 100 Boston tea parties." Elijah reached into his pocket, pulling out a small package wrapped in paper. "I have something for you. It's not much, but—" Faith unwrapped it carefully, revealing a delicate silver locket. When she opened it, she found a tiny daguerreotype of Elijah and Theo on one side, the other still empty. "It's beautiful," she breathed. "But what's the empty space for?" "For our next child," Elijah explained, a hopeful smile playing on his lips. "Whenever that might be." Faith's eyes widened. "Are you saying you want more children, don't you? I thought we agreed on a large family." "We did, but—" Faith hesitated, then decided to share the news she'd been keeping. "I wasn't sure how you'd feel about starting on that plan so soon." Elijah went still. "Faith, are you saying—" She nodded, her smile radiant. "Dr. Thornton confirmed it last week. I'm expecting again. By spring, Theo will have a brother or sister." Elijah whooped with joy, gathering Faith into his arms and kissing her soundly. "You incredible woman! Is that why you've been so tired lately?" "Yes, though it's not as bad as with Theo. Dr. Thornton says second pregnancies are often easier." "I'll make sure of it," Elijah promised. "You'll rest more this time. Let me help more with the bookshop and Theo." Faith touched his cheek fondly. "You already do more than most husbands would, but I won't say no to extra help." They lingered by the creek until twilight, talking about the future, planning for their growing family. When they finally gathered their picnic and headed home, Faith felt a deep contentment that went beyond happiness, a sense that all was right with her world. That night, after checking on Theo sleeping peacefully in his crib, Faith joined Elijah in their bedroom. He was standing by the window, looking out at the star-filled sky. "What are you thinking about?" she asked, slipping her arms around him from behind. "How lucky I am," he replied, turning to face her. "How easily I might have lost you before I even found you." Faith understood his meaning. "But you didn't. You found me, you breathed life back into me, and here we are." "Here we are," Elijah agreed, drawing her close. "And here we'll stay." As they prepared for bed, Faith caught sight of herself in the mirror, the small scar on her shoulder where the lightning had entered. Barely visible now, but a permanent reminder of that day. She no longer viewed it as a mark of trauma, but as a symbol of her second chance at life. A life that had brought her more joy than she had ever imagined possible. Outside, a gentle summer rain began to fall, the soft patter on the roof a lullaby rather than a threat. Faith smiled as Elijah extinguished the lamp and joined her in bed, his arms encircling her with love and protection. Whatever storms might come their way in the future, they would weather them together. And so they did, through the years that followed. Their second child, a daughter named Elizabeth, arrived in the spring of 1877, followed by another son, William, 2 years later. The ranch prospered under Elijah's careful management, and Faith's bookshop became a cornerstone of Sweetwater's growing community. When the railroad finally came through in 1878, bringing new residents and opportunities, Faith and Elijah were established pillars of the town, respected and admired by all who knew them. They never forgot how their story began with a bolt of lightning and a breath that defied death. Each year on the anniversary of that day, they would ride out to the spot where Faith had fallen, now marked by a lone oak tree that Elijah had planted. There, they would reflect on the twist of fate that had brought them together and the love that had grown from that extraordinary beginning. And when their children were old enough to understand, they told them the story how their mother had been struck by lightning on the open plain, and how their father had brought her back with his own breath. It became a family legend, a testament to the power of love and the mysterious ways in which lives intertwine. "You ever regret it?" Elijah asked Faith one evening, decades later, as they sat on their porch watching their grandchildren play in the yard. "Staying in Sweetwater all these years?" Faith, her blonde hair now streaked with silver but her blue eyes as bright as ever, smiled at her husband. The years had etched lines into his face and whitened his hair, but to her, he was still the handsome cowboy who had saved her life that stormy day. "Not for a single moment," she answered truthfully. "This is where I found myself, Elijah. This is where I found you. This is where I was always meant to be." Elijah took her hand, his touch as familiar and comforting as the beat of her own heart. Together, they watched the sunset paint the Texas sky in shades of gold and crimson, grateful for the storm that had brought them together and the love that had sustained them through all the seasons of their lives.